Okay, good morning, everyone. Sorry for the technical difficulties before we got started here. It's Ayesha and Shannon from Empowering Yourself Through Conflict series. Shannon, tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Shannon O'Neill. I'm a qualified mediator. I counsel and educate families and workplaces on how to resolve conflict in effective, or as we are going to talk about today, functional ways.
Great to be with you, Shannon. I'm Ayesha Adhami-Magueta. I'm the principal at the Purposeful Path, a Toronto-based coaching and consulting practice, and I'm happy to be with all of you here today. It is a big day here in the settler communities of Canada, and we want to start with, first of all, a land acknowledgement. So we acknowledge that our collective work takes place in settler communities on the traditional Indigenous territories across what is known as the province of Ontario. We observe and honor the 46 treaties and other agreements that cover these territories and acknowledge First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people who are the traditional carers of these lands, as well as our responsibilities to meaningfully contribute to the well-being of these lands and to the freedom, rights, and protections of all Indigenous peoples. So thank you and welcome to today. So we are picking up on the topics that we talked about in our last session around conflict intelligence. So we're going to start out a little bit and talk about three broad areas of assessing conflict intelligence. So one is self-awareness, second is environment, and third is risk assessment, right? And I think we also want to talk about kind of an additional aspect of conflict, which is functional and dysfunctional conflict. Shannon, why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Conflict is, first of all, it's part of our everyday. And to us to live a life without conflict, at least where we all are at now, is completely unreasonable. So it's more about learning how to handle conflict in an effective way. So there are conflicts that are very functional. They help us move forward, they help us understand ourselves better, they help us understand our relationship better, and they help change social policies as well. There's also dysfunctional conflict, and that's when we see things like on a grand scale war, and in our relationships where it causes harm, and leads to disconnection. So we want to differentiate between functional and dysfunctional conflict. And the skills and tools that you and I talk about in these series are going to help lean conflict on the functional side and away from the dysfunctional side.
Can you give us a couple of examples of what we would like, what would be an example of a functional conflict?
I mean, we could role play one right now. Um,
Go for it. Let's do it.
let's say you and I are organizing this series,
Mhm.
and you're feeling that I am not pulling my weight in doing this.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's upsetting you.
Hmm.
And when we talk, you're not really talking about it. And like, so but you have this feeling every time that we meet. You decide, you know what, because this is important to you, and you are assuming that it's important to me, which it is, you would start, Shannon, I really want to talk about something that is upsetting me. And is now a good time? Is the first question. Because you want consent to enter a difficult conversation from the other person. And then you would say, like, I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed with the workload that I have for doing this series with you. And I'm wondering if you and I could talk about ways that we can share the workload a little bit more. So you're owning that it's your overwhelm, you're owning that you're the one that's upset, and there's no blame, there's no criticism in how you're talking to me about this thing that matters to you. And it matters to me because my relationship with you is important.
Right. So what you're essentially saying is that a functional conflict is a conflict that in some way resolves something or creates a good outcome or creates agreement between two people on how to go forward, or like you said, around social policy, it affects some kind of change that is overall better for people, right?
Yes, and it
Yeah.
acknowledges
Hmm.
and you're open and honest about how you're feeling.
Right.
Like
Okay.
that's a really important part of conflict resolution is to talk about how you're feeling in a way that feels safe for you or comfortable with you for you.
Right. So there's a lot of things that you talked about, and hopefully we'll be able to come back and touch on them as we
Mhm.
go through the session. So give us also an example of what would be a dysfunctional conflict. So you talked about war on a larger kind of global scale. What would be an example of dysfunctional conflict more personally or locally?
Okay, so going back to the example of you and I working together,
Yeah.
um, from your end, it could look like you're lazy. I have to do everything. Screw this, I'm out.
Okay.
From my end, it would look like, what are you talking about? Why would you say that? Like, what do you like? Do you not know the list of things that I do every single day? Like, I'm busy. Why are you even bringing this up right now? Now we're wasting our time.
Yeah. Okay.
It looks like defensiveness, criticism, blame. Those are the behaviors that show up in dysfunctional conflict.
So dysfunctional conflict is more based on emotional behaviors or patterns that are, I would say, maybe based on what you've shared, are potentially, mm, would we say dysregulated? Would we say like reactive? Perhaps not appropriate to the situation, perhaps not constructive to the situation.
Yeah, and if we want to like make it a really soft term, it's unskilled.
Okay, that's a
Yeah,
good one. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
unskilled.
Hmm. Okay. So it's
And
a,
and lacking a little bit of and lacking the self-awareness of, like there's no real space between your body's reaction to being uncomfortable because conflict is uncomfortable
yes.
and the choice of, okay, I'm uncomfortable now. What can I do to feel more comfortable in this situation,
Hmm. Yeah.
in this difficult conversation?
Right. Now, that's a great example from a personal level. I think we can also apply the idea of unskilled, but also sometimes it is something that is uh, fortunately or unfortunately built that way. Like let's say family dynamics, right,
Mhm.
can have dysfunctional conflict.
Mhm.
And it's not that it's necessarily built that way, it's that that's the way that the family has evolved over time, right?
Mhm.
And then it's built that way into things like power imbalances or institutional barriers, where dysfunctional conflict, what it looks like is that there's no way out. There's only one way. It's very rigid, and there's no way to kind of break that barrier, right? So what we want to talk about then today is what are your options and where is your power, right? So let's take a focus on that and start with that area of self-awareness. So what is one's relationship with conflict, right? No one got the playbook. We're all kind of products of our environment and everyone's experiences are different. And we have different forms of competency when it comes to dealing with conflict or different kinds of skills, as you mentioned, Shannon. So we do what we do because that's what we've learned. Maybe that's what we've seen in our family situations. Maybe that's what we've experienced through life, right? So these are things that are behaviors that have been socialized or learned. And sometimes we do particular things or we behave in particular ways or have specific reactions because we have survived difficult situations. Um, again, family dynamics, institutional barriers, discrimination, anything that's a threat to your safety. So, what we want to do, first of all, in that space of creating self-awareness is to take a big, deep breath and be compassionate with ourselves because we only know what we know. And when we know better, we do better, right? So the other thing too is that it takes time to learn these skills and it takes practice to learn these skills. So give yourself that latitude, right? There are also going to be situations where you may still have to call on these survival skills to go forward. So we're not saying that in every situation you should swap out what you're doing with what we're suggesting or what we're offering. What we're saying is that we want to give you options. We want you to really look at where your power lies, and we want you to be able to make informed choices about how you engage
Mhm.
conflict, right?
The way that we respond to conflict is established by the time we're 3. So it's not just learning new skills, it's also unlearning that neural pathway that is like that's well rehearsed. And as you're saying, like family dynamics, it's historical, it's intergenerational, it passes down.
Hmm.
And it's not, to your point, it's not like any of the reactions or the behaviors that we engage in conflict are objectively wrong or right. And to your point, it's that the self-awareness is recognizing that you're making a choice, whatever the behavior is that you are engaging in when you're in conflict. It is a choice. The way you
Absolutely.
feel about it isn't, the way that you react and behave is.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where the going back to what are the options and where's the power? It's the
Mhm.
choices that we make in that situation.
That's right.
Absolutely. Right.
That's right.
So it's looking at it from a deeper lens, having a non-judgmental way of assessing, is it a threat? Is it a risk? And looking at the habits, the reactions that we have on a typical basis, right? Sometimes we're reacting to a memory that we had of feeling threatened, or a memory that we have of a risk because that's what the situation feels like. Is that actually the situation? We don't know for sure. Sometimes we do, but sometimes we don't. And so it's recognizing what's appropriate to that situation, what's effective in that situation, and what's responsive in that situation, right? So if we think about it in that respect, then it gives us more of a context of how we want to relate to conflict. Now, let's just, before we get into it a little bit more, let's also talk about um, recognizing what kind of conflict you're dealing with. What are the hallmarks, Shannon, of a good faith conversation or a good faith in engagement or interaction?
Speaking from the I is the really, as soon as we get into, your fault, you did this, you said this, you, it, again, the body reacts to that, and it feels defensive. And so it's really difficult to engage in a good faith conversation when it's somebody telling you or you telling someone what their motives and their intentions are. So we
Hmm.
can speak about, so speaking from the I is my intention, my motive, and not you mean to hurt me. You are doing this on purpose. And that's not to say that it's not true sometimes, right? Like sometimes people are saying something to hurt you, and sometimes people are saying something to like gain that power over you. It's just if we're engaging in a good faith conversation, those elements are not there.
Right. Yeah. And so sometimes also when the emotions take over, that's when it's a good place to take a pause, to just
Yes.
take a minute, right? If you hear something that feels hurtful, or it feels like the person is trying to get a reaction out of you, a very easy interjection in that situation is to say, what did you mean when you said that? Or, when you just said that, this is how it landed for me,
Mhm.
right? Is to be able to tap into that emotion and rather than be overwhelmed by it or overcome by it, to be able to engage and say, this is how I feel at the moment, right? And it'll give, if that person didn't mean to create that response, it will also give them pause, right?
And in those moments, like like we're flooded, right?
Mm,
If something is said and we perceive it that it was intentionally to hurt us or it does hurt us, right?
mm,
It's kind of physiologically impossible to access that wise mind, or as we were talking about earlier, the sage mind, right?
yeah.
It's
Hmm.
so. even if in that moment, I want to give people the permission, and I want people to give themselves the permission to say, whoa, that was a lot. I need a minute.
Yeah,
So that you can
absolutely.
really understand, is that coming from the moment? Is that coming from the past?
Yeah,
Is that coming from some, like, that's what the flooding is like it's about way more than the moment. It's about all the moments that feeling
right.
that you have right now. So that's why it's so overpowering, and it's okay to take a minute in those moments to understand yourself a little bit more and what's going on.
Absolutely. So just saying, just give me a second, give me a moment. I need to use the bathroom. I need to just take a quick walk around the block. I'll be right back. Right? Something is to give ourselves, like you said, give ourselves that permission to not feel like we have to engage it from that reactive or potentially unskilled place. Right? We're giving ourselves that choice.
It's counterintuitive that you have to slow things down to catch up.
Hmm.
And that's what you have to do in those moments of flooding. Like, and you can feel it in your body, right? Like that's the your you it's like flushed, or your um fists are clenched, or your heart's racing, or you're sweating. Those moments are times to take pause.
Yeah,
And it,
absolutely.
like I said, it's counterintuitive. We think, because conflict feels like a train that's left the station, and it's like, I gotta go, I gotta go, I gotta go, tuk, 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 tuk. And if you can, in that moment, recognize that part of your power is to slow down,
Hmm.
it's more effective. It increases the likelihood of a good faith conversation or a functional conflict.
Right. So in that functional or good faith conversation, what we're really looking for is things like each party is willing to listen and be present with compassion and understanding and non-judgment, that both parties are using language and behavior that is responsible and accountable. So when you talk about the I language, instead of saying, you hurt me, you say, I feel hurt
Hmm.
from
Hmm.
what you're saying, right? It's changing that perspective and being able to speak from that place. When both parties are committed to mutually beneficial outcomes, agreements of terms where possible, right? And that you're potentially you may have to agree to disagree, but you do that in a respectful way so that each party feels seen and heard, right? So functional conflict uh, is based on good faith conversations, and those are some of the elements that you would be either looking for or looking to create with the other person. And Shannon, what do you think about in that moment? Like, let's say you really don't feel like you can come back to this conversation today. What would be a good way to ask for kind of like a little bit of a reprieve or a little bit of a time to get your head together and to really reflect on what's happening and then come back to it. Because for some people, one person walking away from a conversation can feel like rejection, it can feel like blame, it can feel like, so what would be a good
Is.
way to, well, it can feel that way, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But the other person may
Absolutely.
be looking for an opportunity to really come back and be responsive, right? So what would be
Yeah.
some good language that they could use to do that?
So this is the skilled, because the difference between letting the person know that you're coming back to the conversation
Mm,
and is not letting them know is considered avoidance,
right.
or can be perceived, sorry, as avoidance.
Mm,
And letting them know that you are coming back is taking space, and taking space is a conflict connecting behavior.
right.
So it would look like, I understand that this conversation is really important to you, and it is to me too, but right now I can't effectively have this.
Mm,
And I'm worried I'm going to say or do something that I don't mean, and I don't want to
yeah.
do it. So I'm going to need to take X amount of time to come back, and then we can come back and revisit the conversation. Um, that's a non-negotiable, right? Like, if you need to take space and the other person may be feeling like, oh no, because it feels like a threat, the space feels like a
Mm,
threat. that it could be perceived as rejection or it is our responsibility first to take care of ourselves, not somebody else.
Yeah.
So the best you can do is let them know that you're coming back to the conversation. That is the absolute best that you can do. And
Yeah.
it's risky for because I want to, it's also risky and it also can feel scary to do because the other person may not respond, okay, yeah, no problem. Thank you so much for letting me know. Right. So you might have to say that limit or that boundary again. Um, and that does happen, especially in families,
Yeah.
because the that conflict dance is already so well established. And so you might have to say it a couple of times. No, I am taking space right now. I need to take space right now. Um, the other add to that is that if it doesn't work in the moment, maybe when every like work in the way that feels good to both people, then
Hmm.
another good way of kind of reintroducing it is like when everybody's grounded again is to say, hey, I really wanted to talk about yesterday when I wanted to take space. It's really important to me that I'm able to do that. Can we work towards like when we're heated that either one of us, if we need to do that, is allowed to do that and encouraged to do it, in fact.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's really interesting too is I think that we could actually do a couple of whole episodes. One is on helpful and unhelpful silence,
Hmm.
because silence is it's very emotion laden.
Hmm.
How people experience silence is some people can experience as understanding that other people need time to reflect or taking time to reflect themselves. Right. And for other people, it might feel like silence is being used punitively or as a
Hmm.
weapon, right? Or as an oppressive measure, right?
Hmm.
So we see that a lot of times in institutional conflict when one person is fighting against a system, they use silence as a way to disengage from the conversation and to force the other person to capitulate. So I think it would be worthwhile for us to maybe talk about that. And the other one would be around maybe terms of engagement. How do we negotiate the terms of engagement in a conflict, especially when a conflict is chronic, like you're talking about family dynamics, the way things happen continuously. Uh, it might be helpful if both parties are willing, because that's also another challenge, right? Is how do we make that a regular practice? And I think in terms of engagement, we also want to talk about how, because conflict can be so challenging, the the desire to go back in after a quote unquote a conflict has been settled doesn't feel good to people because they don't want to revisit the feelings that they experienced. They don't want to revisit what the other person might be experiencing, and they don't want to start up something else again. So
Hmm.
it's interesting when you talk about revisiting and talking about things, that might be another good topic for us to talk about in terms of engagement.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's picking your poison because, you know, what are the lines? Avoiding conflict to keep the peace starts the war within.
Hmm.
We either continue to do the behaviors that we're used to that we know are going to lead like an unresolved conflict is going to rear its head again like whatever we resist persists, so it's going to keep coming back one way or the
Right.
other.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to, like I said, you pick your poison, either going through the discomfort of resolving it or staying with what you know, and the dance is going to keep going the same
Yeah.
way.
Absolutely. And this is how we shift. We do these things to be able to shift that dynamic into something that's healthier for both parties,
Mhm.
and especially healthier for ourselves. So
Mhm.
when we talk about taking that pause, what are the things that we are actually considering in that space of reflection? One of them is capacity. What is our capacity to deal with conflict at any given time? Do we have the time and the space and the energy to prepare and reflect and respond? Do we have the emotional bandwidth and the mental kind of engagement to be able to ground ourselves and be participating in a constructive or a functional way in that conflict. Are we aware of what biases and preferences and beliefs we're bringing to that situation and how they impact that situation? Like you were talking about, Shannon, earlier, when people say, well, you do this and you hurt me and you oh, and then we get into language like you always and you never and things like that. And that can be very that can really disrupt any kind of functional conflict.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and because I mean, it's instinct, human instinct to defend yourself against the always and never, if it's said in a negative way. Like you always do nice things, you're not going to argue with the other person. You're right, I am. But it's like you always, you always, you're always lazy.
Yeah.
You never help me out around the house, or you never do your work on time. Like it's hard not to come up with a list of things that counter that argument, right?
And what do we do about the stories and the narratives as they come up?
So, I mean, first, it's being really aware of the narrative. And then that's hard to do in the moment. And in the moment when you're flooded and emotionally overwhelmed, because all conflict is emotion based, um, what are you saying to yourself in the moment? Are you saying we're never going to figure this out? This always happens. Anytime I try to bring this conversation up, this is how it's handled. Um, if you're saying those narratives, which like they're based on your experience, it's not that they're wrong, and it's not that it's not a truth in your experience. It's just, it is very stuck.
Mm,
And so to get unstuck, we have to look at all the truths of the experience, and I think, and of the difficult conversation. And I think too, if you don't have the lived experience of resolving conflict in an effective way with someone, and it's really hard to believe that you can do it. So it takes a tremendous amount of trust in new skills and new tools, to believe that it could lead to functional conflict.
absolutely. I think too, what I'm hearing you say is that it's about two different types of narratives. One is about what's happening externally, and
Mhm.
what one is about the stories we tell ourselves,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So being able to shift those narratives is important. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm agreeing with you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so and also then when things come on suddenly and you feel unprepared, how do you set the boundaries? How do you reschedule? How do you create the capacity to deal with it in the moment? And doing things like removing distractions, being able to focus, exercising non-judgment, being as present as possible, being able to course correct. I mean, I've been in conversations where I've said something and I've said, "Oh, just a minute.
Mm.
That's not what I mean to say." Actually, give me a second. Let me just put my thoughts together, and then I'll say what I actually meant to say. So it's not like there are very few situations in life that you can't course correct. But a lot of people, once it's out of their mouth, they think, I can't do anything about it now because, well, I've said it, right? But if you go back and course correct, or if you course correct in the moment, that's a very valuable skill because it keeps the conversation on track and it allows you to show up and be present. And just remember that it's not about perfectionism because nobody is perfect when it comes to dealing with conflict.
The ruptures and repairs actually create more connection in relationships.
Hmm, that's powerful. That's powerful. Yeah.
So, and again, we're talking about the 80%, right? We're not talking about the 20%, but the 80%, here's the compassion piece. We make mistakes. We
Yeah.
say the wrong thing at the wrong time in the wrong way. And despite our intention, whatever our intention is, that could impact the other person in a negative way.
Right.
And showing up for that and doing the repair work is actually building trust in the relationship.
As long as it's not a question of you say sorry, but then you keep doing the same things over and over again.
Yeah, I'm presuming a good faith part and
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And even if like you make a mistake and then you come back and then you see yourself starting to make the mistake again, you do that course correction right then and
Mhm.
there, right? You say, "Oh, I can tell that I'm going to do something or say something that I don't want to say. So I just want to stop myself here and take a minute to compose myself," right?
And it can be collaborative. Like if you're really trying to change an ingrained behavior or and you say to the other person, like, sometimes I don't really realize that I'm doing it. Like, for example, it took me a long time to stop rolling my eyes.
Yeah.
Um, that you just, you know what? I give you permission to say, stop, you're doing it again. Can you please stop?
Yeah.
Right? You can collaborate with your conflict partner on some of these things, some of these behaviors that you're trying to change um, for the functional conflict and for the relationship.
Right. And again, like you were saying, Shannon, we're not talking about dysfunctional situations, family situations, or institutional situations, things like that where there are power imbalances. We're not talking about those situations. We're talking about situations where you and your conflict partner are generally around the same level. You're both willing to communicate and you're both interested in creating a mutually beneficial outcome or an agreement of what's happening, right? So thank you for that. That's really powerful. So we're also talking about what is the capability of dealing with conflict. So being able to effectively communicate, being emotionally regulated, knowing our own power and agency, right? So uh, making the choice between being intentional and being reactive. Are we able to be responsive? Are we active listening, compassionately holding space, choosing to find mutually beneficial outcomes? How can we course correct? How can we be present without distraction and focus and be really present? I remember, Shannon, you've talked about conflict as a choice. Let's dig into that a little bit. What did you mean when you said sometimes we can approach conflict as a choice?
We choose to engage in communication with somebody, right?
Hmm.
Like that's a choice. And so um, it's also a choice, if going back to, do I have the capacity today? Like, do I have the energy? Am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I like lonely, tired? The halt thing.
Yeah,
You don't have to have the difficult conversation. You can say, I can't do this today. I
yeah.
can't do this right now. Um, so I think a lot of times we get wrapped up into or sucked in, I call it the shiny little conflict lure, right? That we bite that conflict lure. Um, like a simple example being in the house, like you ask, where'd you put the milk? And then all of a sudden you're talking about, 5 years ago and how you did the thing. Staying in a difficult conversation that is dysfunctional is a choice. And you don't have to do it. You can say, not today, not right
Hmm.
now. And I think, like I said, I think sometimes we get kind of sucked in or hooked in. And the self-awareness piece is understanding as quickly as possible that you've been hooked and you can stop. You don't have to keep going.
I think that's really important to know in those, because these are the things to practice in the little c conflicts,
Mhm.
right? These are the things
Post it.
to be able um, to to integrate and exercise on a regular basis. So when you get to the big C conflicts where you don't have the you don't have the space to be able to put it off. Then you have more self-awareness about what you need to be able to get through that conflict at that time,
Mhm.
and be present and look for the outcomes and get the outcomes that you actually want to create. So I I really appreciate um, having those kinds of tools to be able to integrate into regular conflicts and then be able to transfer at least some of the things around capacity to the ones that you can't put off and that you have to deal with in the moment. Because that's important. It's important to recognize it, even if you listen to, a LinkedIn Live or a podcast, or you take a course or anything like that, that it doesn't actually integrate until you start practicing. And so if you want to see that change, you have to keep practicing. And practicing means you're not going to do it perfectly. You are going to make mistakes. Things are going to happen. But if you keep doing it, they will level out. Things will start leveling out. You're going to feel better. You'll feel more confidence. Hopefully the people that you're in conflict with will be able to come to the conflict a little bit differently, but that's out of your control. And how they feel about it is also out of your control. The only thing that we can do is to be authentic and to be present and to be committed to making those changes in how we engage conflict.
Skills don't just appear, they are cultivated over time.
There you go.
And
Yeah.
and the other piece of that is that as the skills and you learn your own art of how to communicate in like it is an art, right? Um, that you make and you give yourself acknowledgement for the incremental changes that you've made. Like, let's say, you know what, this time I didn't cross my arms and I didn't roll my eyes. I may have said some things that I wish I hadn't have said, but I was aware and I did not do those things.
Yeah.
Give
Yeah.
yourself that credit for that incremental change and then keep building on it.
Yeah. That's right. Because that's the other thing. We want change to happen fully and completely right away. And that
Mhm.
and it's unrealistic. It's unrealistic to have that expectation, and it puts a lot of pressure, not just on us if we're putting that expectation on us, but also the expectation on the other person to be able to respond the way we want them to.
Yeah. I also think that it's radically accepting that you're going to experience emotional discomfort while you're in these conversations or in these interactions. To, I think you just get more and more kind of resilient towards the discomfort, but I can't, and I don't like using always. However, I will in this particular situation, we will always experience emotional discomfort in a difficult conversation.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. But the
So just
degree
because
of that,
yeah, and just in
yeah,
so it's okay. The reason you're feeling the discomfort is because it matters to you.
right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's important to know. It's just that the degree of discomfort you will experience will change as your skills grow. But also something that we talked about right at the outset of the series was that conflict is normal. So experiencing these emotions, sadness, frustration, anger, disappointment, those are normal feelings that we have. So when we think, oh, I don't want to feel this way, I don't want to experience that, what we're doing is we're shutting ourselves down from those very normal and very expected emotions that we experience every day, that everyone experiences, that are a part of life. So it's not about shutting those emotions down. It's about being able to regulate. I don't really like the word regulate, but work with those because we're not trying to manage them. This is not, you
Mhm.
know, we're not building rules and structures around emotions. What we're trying to do is we're trying to work with them and flow with them and use them to inform how we engage situations. When you feel angry about something, it's not about, oh, okay, I need to be I need to be calm and I need to deal with this, in this particular way. Sometimes you have to get mad.
Mhm.
Sometimes you do.
Anger is usually felt because there's some transgression of a boundary.
Right. So that's important because
Mhm.
if we keep staying calm while someone continuously crosses boundaries, then we're putting ourselves in that position of risk or threat because we're trying to keep the peace, because we're trying to handle it in a better way. And sometimes we do have to get mad. Now, do we, run around and smash things? Hopefully not, right?
Yeah.
What sometimes, right? But it's how do we express that anger? It's
Yes.
knowing how do we express it in a way that it comes across, that it honors how we feel and it honors what we need, right?
And
So,
here's the thing, if we don't deal with it, and again, it's a choice, like you can choose to not deal with it in the moment 100%. But
yeah,
if it is the choice that we consistently make,
mm,
it's gonna come out in other ways.
yeah,
Whether that's like really high self-critic voice,
yeah,
whether that's engaging in behaviors and coping mechanisms that aren't the healthiest for us. Like it is going to persist in some way. It's going to
right.
come out in some way. And passive aggressive comments, like it's there. Just because you're not talking about it doesn't mean it's not there. It's
Yeah,
there.
exactly. Yeah. And those are some of the things that we want to, uh, you know, is it realistic to say, I'm never going to do this again, or that person is never going to do this again, or that's never going to happen again? It's not realistic, right?
Mhm.
Because we're human beings. We tend to behave in particular patterns. We repeat different behaviors, even when we're learning how not to, right? So giving ourselves compassion, being compassionate to other people, and understanding that this is a process. Everything is a process,
Mhm.
how we go through it and how we engage it and how we look at it. It's all, if we look at it in process, it makes it easier to see that it's doable, right?
Mhm.
So the last thing we're going to talk about quickly in terms of trauma and grief, and I think we may have to save environmental assessment and risk assessment to our next episode,
Mhm.
is around how trauma and grief affect how we come to conversations, because conflict means different things to different people. Um, you might have had the experience of growing up with people around you who could express themselves in conflict, but maybe you grew up with people who couldn't express themselves in conflict effectively. Maybe they shut down. Maybe they were the people that ran around and smashed things and raged about it, right? And it's not just, I don't want to say that anything is right or wrong. Everything will have a particular impact on how we do it and the skills that people had that at that time to deal with those situations, the knowledge they had. So again, when we know better, we can do better. And some people didn't have those skills. They didn't have that knowledge. They didn't have that modeling in their own childhood, and so they weren't able to show that to their families or their children per se. So how to agree to disagree, that's a big one. We see that, you know, in professional people. We see that in workplace situations. We see that in politics, that people can't agree to disagree. So these are natural things in life that happen, but how we are equipped to engage them can change that conflict to a learning opportunity, to a skills opportunity. And trauma and grief, when we're experiencing them, intergenerational trauma, for example, or trauma that we've experienced in our lives, and a lot of people don't even attach that word trauma to difficult and painful experiences that they've been through that essentially change the core of who they are. Shannon, if you were to define trauma, how would you identify a traumatic experience? What would you say is uh, makes up a traumatic experience?
It's an event or
Mm,
a series of events that overwhelm our capacity to process. And there's three elements that are present in a traumatic event. One,
mhm,
that you're unprepared for it. two, that it was unexpected, and three, that you're unable to stop it from happening.
Hmm.
And if we look at the definition, and because I think oftentimes we presume that a trauma is those big T traumas, like the stuff that you see on the news, right? But there are a lot of the smaller traumas, like living room traumas, right? That happen in just our experience. And like, for example, as a child, your emotional needs weren't met in the way that you needed them at the time. And then you never really recovered from that. And then something else happened, and then something else happened. These impact our ability to show up in difficult conversations because it's just our body takes over and says, nope, unsafe, 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 and we shut
Hmm.
down.
Right. So there's the things that happen on a day-to-day basis, the things that we don't process, and so we end up adding that to the luggage that we're carrying, the baggage that we're carrying around, right?
Yeah.
And then there's other types of trauma that are more in terms of, as you said, like things that cross your boundaries. They could be emotional or physical or mental or spiritual, right? Something that happened, it might have happened once, it might have had it happened repeatedly, right? Those kinds of traumas, things that are beyond our control because they're happening externally, something that's happening in the environment, something that's happening politically, right? So there's a lot of different forms of trauma, and they compromise our abilities because it immediately is experienced as a conflict that is bad, that is harmful, that is painful, and that results in detriment and destruction. It could be personal, environmental, or relationships. And like you said, it feels unsafe, right? And we have a lack of agency. The emotional response is out of proportion with the situation. We may feel hyper reactive, or what a lot of people called triggering. They might have triggering responses, right? Um, and I think that you also mentioned that the thing about trauma is that it feels life-threatening.
Yeah, it feels like life or death.
Right.
It feels like, well, because that's what your body is telling you. It's in
Mm.
fight, freeze, fawn mode. Like it's like, check out, mind. I'm here to protect you, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And because it is such a strong signal from the body, the mind kind of goes, okay, see you later. Like
Mm.
it's, as I said, physiologically impossible to assess the situation from an objective standpoint when
Right.
that happens.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of work to counsel your body to take a deep breath,
Right.
and a lot of practice and a lot of skills. So,
Absolutely. So
um,
there's trauma, and dealing with that, as you say, takes a lot of skill. It takes that commitment, and it takes that desire to be able to move out of that kind of, and as someone who is a trauma survivor myself, I know that it impacts you on all levels of your core elements, body, heart, mind, and spirit. So that commitment to healing not just one aspect of your personality or one aspect of your experience takes that self-awareness to know where something lives in your body, what kind of self-talk has come out of that experience, right? How it affects your ability to be present and to emotionally process. And then what it makes you feel like in terms of, the how you feel about the world or how you feel about something bigger than yourself. When you are feeling uh, the effects of the trauma, most frequently people feel hopeless and they feel helpless because they don't feel like there's anything they can do. And there are a lot of things that one step at a time can be done to recover from the experiences of trauma. Can we completely remove them, completely heal from them? I don't think remove them, but perhaps create enough distance to create healing around them.
yeah, I mean, resilience is another way to look at it, that we gain resilience to that discomfort. Um, but it's hard. This is the hard work because even
Yeah.
being in conflict is traumatic, right? Or
Right.
can
Yeah.
be traumatic.
Yeah.
Um, that really hurt my feelings. Well, you're too sensitive, right?
Mm.
Ugh.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. And some of the conflict can come from different emotional. So just stepping away from trauma for a second and looking at what you were talking about, is the difference in communication styles, how people
Mhm.
have different communication styles and what that means to them. So frequently, just recently, I've done a number of trainings on cross-generational communication. And it
Mhm.
can be that the way that one person addresses something can feel like it's a conflict for someone who is, for example, more introverted, or someone who is direct, how they're perceived and received by someone who is more introverted can come across as being more aggressive or uh,
Disrespectful.
disrespectful. Exactly, right? When really it's a difference in communication styles and how
Mhm.
people receive information. So it's also considering those things. So just touching on the last thing about grief. So grief happens for a number of reasons. It's not just losing someone that we care about. It could be a transition, a life transition, the end of a job, the end of a friendship. It could be an illness. It could be a change of a life situation. And then in that place, our ability to engage conflict can be compromised because we may be more sensitive. We may feel anger about what's happening in other areas of our life that we bring to to the conflict. We might be fearful or feel fragile or feel like we can't engage in a conversation and just withdraw completely because we're unable to process or express and maybe just feel stuck, right? And I think um, there are other aspects of grief too that we need to consider.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different definitions of grief. The grief that we're talking about in terms of loss of job, et cetera, it would be it's disenfranchised grief or anticipatory grief. And essentially those two griefs, and you can look up the definitions of them, but essentially what it is, it's like it's the grief that there's no kind of ceremony for them, right? There's no, people don't show up with casseroles and there's no kind of funeral for this grief. It's
Right.
like very personal, alone grief that one experiences. It's so lonely. It's like so lonely.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that's good for I think to be able to think about it in that respect. I love that you said that there's no ceremony around it,
Yeah,
right? So part of the healing ritual around that grief could be to create a
that's right.
ritual, right? To create a closure ritual for ourselves. And that can be said for a lot of things, conflicts that, for example, are quote unquote unresolvable. To be able to create ritual and ceremony around closing them for ourselves can
Yeah,
be also helpful. So the idea here is that no matter what your state of self-awareness is, we're not suggesting that you not engage. You're still going to engage. But what you're going to do is you're also going to consider all of these different elements and figure out your way to be responsive and to be effective and to be able to be authentic in that situation because those are the most critical things in any kind of conflict that shifts them from being dysfunctional to being functional,
yeah.
right?
It's
Yeah.
learning your art, learning your art.
Learning your art of communication. Absolutely. All right, Shannon, any closing thoughts for today?
No, we covered a lot.
We did cover a lot. We did. Yeah.
Covered a lot.
Yeah. Well, we hope you found this helpful. We look forward to hearing your comments and please reach out to us if we can do anything, help in
Mhm.
any way. You can check out our services at Shannon,
PLE
TLE
Wellness
Wellness,
Center.
yeah, .com and at thepurposefulpath.ca, or you can reach out to us here on LinkedIn. And we look
Yeah.
forward to seeing you again for our next episode in May, the end of May, last Monday in May. and we'll see you then. And there we will continue this conversation around conflict intelligence, and we'll cover environmental assessment and risk assessment. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Those of you who lived in the settler communities in Canada, please get out there and get out the vote. Today's an important day.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.